Uganda alone, over 900 children are born with sickle cells, and that translates into 2.8% of them living with sickle cell anemia. And in relation to that, it is actually, statistics show that many of them do not get to celebrate even their 5th birthday. Now, what does that mean? That means that this is a situation, this is a disease that has actually caused havoc in many African, or specifically very many Ugandan homes. And that is what this morning we're basically going to be dissecting. But I am not the expert when it comes to this particular topic. Joining me today on the conversation is Dr. Henry Dungu, all the way from the Uganda Cancer Institute. Good morning, sir, and thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Good morning. How are you?
I am well, thank you for asking. Now this morning we're going to be talking about sickle cells. First off, many times we have heard this particular phrase. I may understand it differently, the viewer may understand it differently, but as a profession, in your profession, what would be the state of having sickle cells? Break it down for us. What does it mean?
Sickle cell or sickle cell disease is actually a divergent group of diseases that we divide in science into different types. But the commonest that we have in this country is what we call sickle cell anemia and sickle cell trait. Sickle cell trait that I would start with is the commonest. It means that one is carrying a gene of sickle cell, much as they don't have sickle cell anemia. When you inherit 2 genes, it means you are able to express the disease. And then I'll take you back that the sickle cell gene is a weak, lazy gene, that it can only express itself if it is present in 2. We call it a recessive gene. So when you have your normal hemoglobin, usually hemoglobin that is normal is called hemoglobin AA, and the A's are capital A's. So if you have hemoglobin AS, it means you are carrying the sickle cell gene, which is S, but in singular. That puts you into a category of a carrier of the disease. If you have 2 expressions where you have hemoglobin SS, then we say you are homozygous and you are carrying the sickle cell anemia. You can express all the symptoms and the complications of sickle cell anemia. So the way this is passed on, you know, a mother will contribute a gene and a father will contribute a gene to make a complete child. So if a mother is hemoglobin AS and the father is hemoglobin AS, in other words, if both of these are carriers, it means they have a 25% chance of passing on sickle cell anemia as a disease to their offspring. And by this I mean for each pregnancy that one is carrying, if you are a carrier as a mother and you're a carrier as a father, for each pregnancy, there's a 25% chance or risk of having your child having hemoglobin SS, which is the sickle cell hemoglobin. There's also a 50% chance of having a child who is a carrier, and a 25% chance of having a child with a normal hemoglobin.
So, doctor, what are some of the signs and symptoms that you can actually tell from an early age? Because looking at the stats, very many children, especially in Uganda, have not even lived to celebrate their 5th birthday. And probably I'm thinking that parents did not know. So how are you able to tell?
The way you can tell that this child could be having sickle cell anemia is when maybe around 4 months, 3 months, some others can even go up to 1 year. They start developing complications. A child becomes anemic.
That is lack of enough blood.
You go to blood, child has been sick and they have no blood. Some of them, the eyes will turn yellow. Others, the commonest, they present with pain in the hands and the toes.
Yes.
You get the joints getting swollen. We call that hand-foot syndrome. And a child keeps crying, and then people say, child cries all the time. The child is in pain. They have gotten into a crisis. So they will present like that. Many of them will get what we call failure to thrive, meaning that they are not reaching their developmental milestones the way they should. They are not growing to the level that is expected. The weight is not the best. They don't grow properly.
How long can a person live with this condition?
They can live as long as possible, like any other person. The challenge is this, that if you don't get to understand that your child has sickle cell, you may not give them the care they need at the right time. And that's why the government has put in place a mechanism for newborn screening of all children, especially in areas that have a high burden of the disease. When you look at, say, northern Uganda, northeastern Uganda, when they did studies, they found that they had slightly higher levels than some other areas. So they've been given a priority so that newborn screening starts. Once you understand that your child has sickle cell, you give them the best attention, you start them on treatment early, and they'll live normally.
I remember during my school days, one of my colleagues, actually classmates, suffered from sickle cells, but I noticed that they used to put them on a special kind of diet. For someone watching this morning, and probably they have their child who is having this particular condition, how would you advise that they treat it when it's even at a mild level before it gets severe?
First of all, like any other child, a child with sickle cell should be given the treatment that any other child gets. The vaccinations, they need to be well vaccinated, including vaccination against pneumonia. They need to be well hydrated most of the time because they have a hemoglobin that is rather rigid. When it goes through the blood vessels, it cannot meander through properly. It gets stuck. So they need to have good hydration. They drink water, they drink juice, and they are kept warm.
Because there's actually an article I was reading, and it said that people living with this kind of condition are actually more prone to getting infections.
Exactly.
That means they can easily get sick.
They can easily get infected. Unlike the colleagues who are carriers, a person who is a carrier rarely gets malaria. But when you have hemoglobin SS, you're at risk of getting malaria, including the severe forms of the disease. They are at risk of getting infections because, as time goes on, they lose their natural defense. When they lose their spleen, there's what we call autosplenectomy. When the spleen disappears, it means they can get infected with so many other organisms. And that's why we encourage them to be vaccinated.
Okay. So among some of the things that they actually experience is vision loss. Of course, you mentioned one of them. But how can we deal with that as well?
Vision loss comes with time. To prevent that, you need to assess the child as soon as possible. And if they are having moderate to severe disease, there's things we do scans of the brain, etc. We start them on disease-modifying treatment.
Immediately.
So that they don't get into that. The visual loss comes because of the crisis, because of the blockage in proper blood flow into certain parts of the brain, including the vessels that supply the eye, supply the retina. Once those vessels get blocked, then eventually the vision disappears.
So now looking at some of the misconceptions around sickle cells, you mentioned it yourself, not many of the Ugandans living here especially are aware of what sickle cells is all about, how you can prevent it, what causes it. And you mentioned something and said that most of the times you said sickle cell is more like a love because your mother and father join together. Exactly. And then it spreads on.
It is collective responsibility. But go ahead.
But then, how? Because if you're looking at mother and father coming together and it's a joint union, is there a possibility? Because we have had very many people saying that the way you hear HIV, you can probably get it by touching someone. So we've had so many myths around sickle cells, including the fact that, you have sickle cells, I cannot touch you, I cannot share the same plate with you. Is this actually true? Shed more light on it.
Of course it's not true. It's extremely wrong. Sickle cell is not an infectious disease. Sickle cell is not a non-communicable disease. Maybe it is, but it's a genetic disorder that complicates into a number of things.
Finally, as we wind up this conversation, Doctor, are there any last remarks that you would want to pass on to the viewer watching this morning in regard to what we have just discussed?
I think it's important for people to understand before they get children, to understand their status.
So it goes back to the parents. You need to test.
Before you get married, okay, go and be tested to know, the way you know your hemoglobin, you get to know your hemoglobin type. The other time we talked about blood, it was blood what?
Blood
group, blood types. Now I want you to understand your hemoglobin type, because it's the one to tell whether you will have sickle cell or not among your siblings. So if you, the man, you have hemoglobin AS, and your girlfriend has hemoglobin AS, I'm not saying don't get married, but I will advise you that when you get married, for each of the pregnancies you'll have, you have a 25% risk of having a child with hemoglobin SS. Some people think that when I say 25%, it means the other percentage is for normal. It's for each pregnancy you carry. There's that risk. You can carry all your pregnancies and they fall into that category, or they all fall into the category of carriers or into the category of normal hemoglobin. So my humble appeal is, if you're in love, go and have a test so that you know, and then you take an informed decision. You can come to an expert to give you genetic counseling so that you take a decision that we want to move on like this. If we choose that we want to move on like this and we're both carriers, then we should be ready. If we get a child with sickle cell, let's do ABCD.
Well, now I have a plot or plan with a doctor immediately after this interview. I'm going to drag my partner, and these are some of the things that we're actually going to find out.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for shedding more light on this particular conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I do hope you are able to pick a thing or two. For me, what I'm going to do is I'm definitely going to be going with my partner to have these tests carried out. It is very important. But we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we have a lot more that has been in store for you. Good morning.